that really the litmus test of whether or not a country's democratic rule of law is going to be able to survive is a function of how that society contends with their Jews, how that society looks at Jews, because we really are the most vulnerable people and have been for thousands of years. And so the issue of whether or not a democracy is vibrant is really directly correlated with the level of anti-Semitism in that society.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator and debaters.
Good afternoon. Winston Churchill once said, "You have enemies. Good. That means you've stood for something sometime." Our two debaters today have stood for something and have the scars to prove it. Today we are honored to have two opinion makers, two thought leaders, two individuals who love their nation and have fought for its defense, yet two distinct and different visions of how Israel can live in peace and security, and two distinctly different answers to the question of whether a two-state solution is viable and whether indeed it is desirable. It's my honor, my privilege to reintroduce Ari Shavit, senior correspondent for Haaretz and author of My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel, and Caroline Glick, senior correspondent, contributing editor at the Jerusalem Post, author of The Israeli Solution, a one-state plan for peace in the Middle East. Before beginning, it is also my privilege, and we have many lawyers in the room, to introduce the rules. Each speaker will be given the chance to make an opening statement. Be 5 minutes for opening remarks. They will then have the opportunity to respond to each other, which they'll have 3 minutes to do so. At that point, I will give certain questions to them. At some point, we will then open it up to the audience for questions. In order to ask a question, please fill out one of the comment cards. They're distributed. You can see AJC staff there, which will give it to you. Or you can tweet your question to @AJC Global using the GLOFO hashtag. And that is also for those following us online and on C-SPAN today. If you don't understand what I just said with @AJC Global and GLOFO hashtag, if you're here, you can fill out the sheet. Or ask somebody younger working on their phone right now. At the conclusion, each debater will have 3 minutes to give some concluding remarks. Finally, as I said before, this follows in the great tradition at AJC. We value the notion of bringing different sides here to express their views. Both these individuals have tremendous respect for each other, and we have tremendous respect for them. I'd ask the audience to do the same. Please hold applause, despite the temptation, until the end. And the debaters know, and I'm aware, that they will, although they'll strike hard blows, they'll strike fair ones. At this point, Ari, if I could turn over to you. By pre-arrangement, we've agreed that Ari will go first, and we'll give it to you for your opening statement. Ari?
Thank you so much. Let me begin, before we address the issue, with 3 personal remarks. I hope they'll be taken off my time. First of all, thank you so much. I'm so privileged, and I think we are both, to be here with the AJC. We want to thank David Harris, the remarkable David Harris. For me, I've learned to admire the American Jewish community in the last year. An organization like yours are so needed. So I'm so grateful for you being here and for us having this discussion here. The second personal remark is that I really hope, while we should have a serious, sometimes fierce debate, we should have a respectful one. With all the challenges facing us, I think we should have a spirit of Ahavat Israel and, as much as possible, Achdut Israel. And Caroline, let me shake your hand. I think that if we'll manage to prove that we can have a respectful, civilized debate among us, we'll be doing something for our people.
So I'll just interrupt you and say I agree.
The third personal remark is just about myself, before we address the issue. I'm a Ben Gurion Zionist, apart from my beloved wife, children, dear family, friends. There is nothing more sacred in my life than the Jewish democratic state. So whatever I believe in and whatever my approach is because of that. Because I think it is so essential to preserve and save this miraculous state of Israel that we've managed to establish and sustain. Now I shall begin. Before we address the two-state solution, I think we must address the alternative, the one-state solution. And I have 2 or 3 things to say about that. One, I wonder, how is it that I go around American campuses fighting BDS, which promotes a one-state solution, and then I go back home and find that half of the ministers in my government support a one-state solution? Our enemies, and Caroline rightly is so concerned about our enemies, they are not encouraging us to pull out now. Our enemies want a one-state solution, and they know why. The second point, when I go to these campuses, the one reason I use to win the debate regarding these enemies of ours, I say I have a one answer to the one-state option. And the one-word answer is Syria. We tried the one-state solution in the Middle East. We put Sunnis, Alawites, and Druze in one country. What happened? As long as there was a strong dictator, it somehow worked. It wasn't Denmark, but it somehow worked. The moment he got weak, we are seeing the worst human catastrophe in our region, and the worst human catastrophe as we speak. And the world is helpless. So if this is what happens to Sunnis and Alawites and Druze in Syria, what would happen to Jews and Arabs in Israel with all the terrible conflict that we went through, with all the differences, with all these multi-dimensional differences? The third argument is that in my mind, this endangers the Zionist project. What was Zionism all about? Having a massive Jewish majority, so we will have Jewish sovereignty within a democratic context. Throughout the years, we were minorities. Even in this great country, we are a minority. We wanted one place where we'd be so clear that we are a massive majority, with sovereignty in a democratic context. In my mind, the one-state option endangers, in the most dramatic way, the Zionist vision and the Zionist dream. But I'm not a starry-eyed peacenik. I knew, and I wrote about it for 20 years, that many of the attempts to bring a quick final status solution are flawed. It failed in 1993, it failed in 2000, it failed in 2008, it failed in 2004. So I asked my friends on the left to learn from this experience. You run into the wall once, you run into the wall twice. After 5 times you run into the wall, it's time to understand there is a wall there. But that does not mean we have to put 1 million more settlers in Judea and Samaria. That does not mean we have to kill the option, the hope. So what is my vision? I think we need a new creative approach. We Israelis are about thinking outside the box. What I believe in, because I know there isn't a two-state solution that can be implemented tomorrow. We need a two-state vision, two-state option, and two-state dynamics. Vision, because throughout our history, we were stronger, not only more just, when we were moderate and generous. We accepted the partition plan in 1937. That's why we won the terrible civil war of the 30s. We accepted the partition plan in 1947. That's why we won in 1948. We went to Bill Clinton's Camp David summit. We did not achieve peace there, but because of that, we had the credibility and legitimacy and the unity to win against the terrible suicide bombing of the Second Intifada. So we need the three: the vision, the two-state vision, the two-state option to keep that open, and we need the two-state dynamic. Now, what do I talk about when I talk about the two-state option? That's why settlement building beyond the barrier is so dangerous. Because it kills the possibility of doing anything in the past. I am not naive. I understand the danger. I want security, security, security. I think that settlement building beyond the blocks weakens Israel, doesn't strengthen Israel. So if we try a settlement freeze beyond the barrier, beyond the blocks, in my mind, we are not endangering ourselves in any way, but we are keeping the two-state option there.
Thank you. Ari,
What?
if I could ask you,
I still have
even with your extra time.
just last one, the two-state dynamics. Let's have a Marshall Plan for Gaza. Let's build Rawabis in the West Bank. Let's work with those constructive Palestinians on giving some future to our neighbors while controlling our destiny and maintaining our security. Thank you very much.
Caroline, you have 7 minutes and 52 seconds to respond.
That's including the personal note?
And one interruption by you. So, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for hosting us in this important debate. And thank you, Ari, for being a very esteemed debating partner or opponent. It's a pleasure and an interesting challenge, really, to debate you, Ari. I think Ari is the example, shining example of what's best on the left. From a policy prescription, he remains entirely true to his tribe, but he represents the best of that tribe because from time to time, he can make room for facts that are uncomfortable to his tribe. For instance, in a very important article that he wrote in 1997, he described the original BDS. That would be the Bibi derangement syndrome, of the pathological hatred that the left harbors for Prime Minister Netanyahu. This was written during his first tenure as Prime Minister. And he showed that that hatred is tribal, just as the policy is tribal, that the left wishes to advance in Israel, for Israel. And I think, as for policies and how we're supposed to look at the two-state solution and its continued viability or lack thereof, I think it's important for us to understand the nature of the debate on this policy today in Israel. Now, on the one hand, 20 years ago, the left won the ideological debate in Israel. Today, and really for the past 20 years or so, you've had about a 3/5 majority, consistent popular support among Israelis for the establishment of a Palestinian state under certain conditions. On the other hand, the left cannot win an election. They cannot win an election as leftists, at least. When the left goes to elections, indeed, it seeks to hide the fact that it's left. And the question is, what explains this seeming contradiction? How can you have won the ideological debate and yet you fail to win elections? And the reason that the left fails to win elections is because most Israelis have come to understand on our backs through our horrific experience over the past 22 years since Israel embraced and adopted the two-state solution as the core of its national strategy. We have come to understand that these conditions, the certain conditions under which we would support the establishment of a Palestinian state, will never, ever be met. and that it's silly to argue about how to make this happen. It is silly, it is a waste of time, and indeed it is irrational to argue about how to make this happen. This is mainly because the Palestinians do not now and never have wanted primarily to establish a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. It is irrational to continue to discuss how to advance the two-state solution, because the two-state solution is founded on the premise that the Palestinian conflict with Israel is about land, and it is not about land. The Palestinian conflict with Israel is about their failure and the greater Arab and Islamic failure to come to terms and accept the justice of the continued existence of the state of the Jewish people, the Jewish state, the state of Israel. That is the core and the cause of the conflict, and that is why it is enduring, and that is why we will never reach a two-state solution in our lifetimes. So partitioning or questioning how to partition and under what conditions we should partition the land of Israel west of the Jordan River is similarly irrational. The real question that we ask in Israel, and that I think should become the question that guides our discussion about how to contend with the Palestinian conflict with Israel, is given, to take as a given, to understand that it is given that Israel will be at odds with the Palestinians for the foreseeable future. The question, the policy question that we should be considering at all levels of our societies is, how should we manage the situation? How should we manage a situation that we cannot resolve through a peace accord based upon the partition of land, based on the assumption that the way to reach peace is to give away land? In my book, I make the case for matching our democracy with our security requirements by extending Israel's democratic rule of law, our liberal legal code, to Judea and Samaria. I argue this not because it will bring peace. I argue this because it is just and it is right. It reflects the rights of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and the justice of our state. By extending our democracy throughout Judea and Samaria, it also shows that our democratic values go hand in hand with our security concerns. Moreover, and finally, it answers the existential question of how Israel is to handle the Palestinian security threat that will not disappear in our lifetimes. And because you took extra time, and I'm a woman, I will take less time. I'm done. Thank you.
Ari, before allowing you to respond, I want to remind the crowd to fill out your cue cards and hand them to HIC staff so we have questions. Ari, with response.
So first of all, I totally agree with Caroline that the reason Israelis don't go for the moderate options is that the Israeli left and the international community have failed in producing a realistic peace concept that addresses the failure of the previous attempts and the chaos, violent chaos all around us. And this is why I promote a new kind of approach that will be much more realistic, as I said, going for the two-state vision, creating a two-state dynamics and keeping the two-state options, knowing there is no solution. There is no two-state solution, by the way, and definitely not a one-state solution in the coming years. No quick fixes, no messianic solutions. It's a complicated, difficult situation. We have to deal with the complexity. But if I may, I'd like to challenge the option that Caroline is promoting. I have mainly two concerns. One is that if we go on for the one-state solution or option, we are endangering ourselves as Jews twice. Once, we are endangering the Jewish majority. Now, there is a great demographic controversy. I don't want to get into it, that Caroline writes about it. There are two schools of thought. I don't want to get into it, about the West Bank demographics. Let me speak about where we know the numbers. Israel itself, sovereign Israel. Right now, we are already down to a 75% Jewish majority in Israel. In 2025, we are talking about 70%. If you are to add even 1 million, I think there are 3 million, but even if you add 1 million Arabs into that fragile formula, we will either stop being Jewish or we'll stop being democratic. If we will not give full rights to all these Palestinians, we will not be democratic. And if we do, we will go down to levels of a Jewish majority that is so fragile. And if we insist within that context on our right to live in Hebron, they'll want to live in Netanya. If we'll build all around Nablus, they'll build all around my hometown of Rehovot. Where does this lead us? Either we commit suicide as a national home, or we go back to old Alabama of the early 50s. This is not an option. The second problem, and I have little time for it, is my fear for the impact of this on your younger generation here. This kind of attitude will endanger the ability of young American Jews to stand by Israel and identify with Israel. The only way to win Jewish minds and hearts, and non-Jews, but I begin with the Jews, is to prove that Israel is a benign Israel, that it's fully democratic, that it's America's small endangered sister, that we are frontier democracy supported by your great democracy. If we endanger that, we endanger everything.
All right. So first of all, as a product of the American Jewish community, I think that you are vastly underestimating the ability of this community to understand what is good and right. I do not believe, not even for a moment, that the way to win the hearts and minds of young American Jews to say that we're sorry and we're desperate and we're pathetic and we need you. That is not exactly an inspiring message, and it is certainly not true. It is not true that Israel is pathetic. It is not true that Israel is a poor, weak democracy that is in absolute need of the American Jewish community in order to continue to exist, with all due respect to our partners in the American Jewish community. That is not the kind of message that people need to hear anywhere, not only in the United States, not in Israel, not in France, not in Belgium, not in South America, nowhere. We are not a pathetic basket case of a nation. To the contrary, we go from strength to strength, thank God, because we are just, we are right, we are creative, we are exciting, and we believe in who we are and what we do in this world. Now, you know, the whole idea that I'm not going to discuss demographics, I wish that we could not discuss demographics because I am not a numbers person, but the numbers that you gave, quite frankly, are incorrect, Ari. Israel has a 78% Jewish majority inside of the 1949 armistice lines. Moreover, our fertility rates are higher than the Arabs. We surpassed them in 2012 in Israel and as well in Judea and Samaria. When you add to that Aliyah, which has always been the safeguard of the vast Jewish majority in the state of Israel, you understand that what you're saying is simply untrue. Now, you know, as to the whole issue of whether or not extending Israeli democracy to Judea and Samaria is going to be a viable option or not, you know, in my book, I set out all the problems involved in this plan, and they are many, and they are mighty, and they are intimidating. But what they are problems that can be solved when bright people, when committed people, when people who love Israel as much as you and I do, and as the vast, overwhelming 99.9% of Israelis do, and the vast, overwhelming majority of American Jews do, then we can solve these issues. What we cannot solve, what we cannot contend with, is the challenge that the two-state solution presents to Israel. Because the real demographic threat, Ari, and the real demographic threat, my friends from the American Jewish community, is the threat of a Palestinian state. Everybody talks about this idea that there can't be a so-called right of return of the children, to the great-great-grandchildren of Arabs who left Israel between 1947 and 1949. But the fact of the matter is that everybody says they can move to Palestine. But they cannot move to Palestine because as we look at the borders of what is happening in the Arab world surrounding us, we understand that the true demographic threat to Israel, the true existential threat to Israel, would be the establishment of that Palestinian state, which would be overwhelmed by millions and millions of people who would be coming in, not only the so-called refugees, but all of the triumphant jihadists who would be marching on Palestine, and we would have a situation where Abu Mazen, who is not a moderate but pretends to be for television appearances in the United States, would be killed, his children would be killed, they would all meet the same fate as Muammar Gaddafi. And we would see a jihadist enclave, the likes of which we never imagined, on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and indeed in control of parts of Jerusalem that would be partitioned under the two-state formula. So I think that with all due respect to the heinous problems that a one-state solution and one-state formula, so-called, presents to Israel, it is a possibility. On the other hand, a two-state solution is a recipe for disaster, as we have seen over the past 22 years. Thank you.
So first question, and before this debate began, we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu speak about his belief in a two-state solution, reaffirming that belief. Of course, we did not include the clip of him speaking before the election. Ari, do you believe that the Prime Minister does support a two-state solution? And if he doesn't, is that a possibility?
The Netanyahu enigma is with us for 20 years. I've been following it closely myself, and I don't know if there is a clear solution there. I'll tell you what I thought. First of all, I really appreciated what Prime Minister Netanyahu did in his Bar Ilan speech, and in the fact that he agreed to a settlement freeze afterwards. And I think he does not get enough credit for both acts. It's not trivial for the leader of the Israeli right to accept the two-state idea in his own version and to go for a settlement freeze, something that was not done by any previous. So Netanyahu had his contribution again to do what I talk about, which is to capture the moral high ground. Zionism succeeded because we had a combination of realism and morality. We always understood we are a small, lonely people, and many people hate us. We are not China. We cannot do Tibet. We are not Russia. We cannot do the Ukraine. We have to act in a very sophisticated way. On the one hand, being tough, being strong. We will not survive in that region for a day if we are not very powerful. But our power has to be combined with morality. And what Netanyahu understood is that he has to do that and capture the moral high ground. I think he wasn't committed enough. Again, I don't think there was a possibility to reach. I think there was a mistake in going for the final status option. And I said it in real time. When Secretary Kerry came, and I admired his ambition, his idealism, his commitment, I said, this won't work. And I kept saying, I hope, I pray there is a secret team in a secret State Department cellar that is planning Plan B. Because it was so obvious that what happens is that the decent American comes into town, and the Israelis and Palestinians sing him the peace song he wants to hear. No one means it. I thought that the kind of practical approach would have been much more successful, and I wish Netanyahu would have gone for that. I don't think that within the leadership we have and the circumstances we have, we can have any new peace deal signed on the White House lawn. There will not be Nobel Prizes. But we have to go for the alternative approach. If rather than go to the diplomatic peace, we will try to bring water to Gaza, if we'll combine Israel's amazing water technology with Saudi money under American leadership, so we will prevent a terrible human catastrophe that might happen in Gaza in a few years when they don't have drinking water. Think how that will change the dynamics. We will be offering something positive. Water in the desert, in the Middle East. It'll be such a right kind of thing to do. And if in the West Bank we go to build this amazing city of Rawabi, the Fayyad spirit, this is something to work with. If we go into working more such projects, so the Palestinians go on a very long and gradual process of nation building, very slow, very cautious. It will take a long time. We have to be very cautious. It's trial and error all the time. We have to learn from all the mistakes in the past, including in Gaza. But to leave things as they are, with no Israeli initiative, with no hope, with not projecting anything positive, this endangers our unity, because if, God forbid, we will have to use force again, and we might, we don't have enough legitimacy now in the world, because settlements have caused such a damage to our fight, our just fight against centrifuges. It took so much energy out of the room, so much blood. If we go back to this Ben Gurion spirit that I talk about, which is to know where we are, to understand the conflict won't end, but to understand that we are Jews. We are Jews. We must have a real commitment to democracy and a search for peace, even when peace is not there. That kind of attitude will make us stronger, will make us more just, and will guarantee our future.
So Caroline, it'd be the same question. You worked for the Prime Minister, and if I could ask you to, has he read your book? Does he agree with your sentiments?
Well, you know, in all fairness to Prime Minister Netanyahu, he made very clear that the position of his government is that it continues to support the establishment of a Palestinian state, and that is not the position that I argue in my book, and that's fine. Ari supports it as well, and I completely respect his right to do so. I personally think it's very dangerous, but that doesn't mean that isn't a reasonable and perfectly legitimate position to have either for an individual or for the government of Israel. I do think, though, you know, that it's important. You praised Netanyahu for coming out, and he did. He made significant statements and significant concessions in order to convince mainly President Obama of his seriousness in moving forward in negotiations. And we see that he got nothing. You see that not only did he get nothing, Obama and Abbas pocketed that concession and asked for more and demanded more. And then when Israel didn't give more, Israel was condemned. It doesn't matter that for the first 9.5 months of that vaunted settlement freeze, when Jews were denied our rights to property, in an unbelievable slight and trampling, in fact, of our democratic rule of law, civil rights of Jews, property rights of Jews, because we're Jewish, were denied because we're Jewish in Jerusalem. Because we did that, we were supposed to be supported. We were supposed to show the entire international community, first and foremost, the United States of America, the truth and sincerity of our intentions and our desire for peace. And what did we get? 9 months of the 10 months freeze. Mahmoud Abbas refused to even sit down and negotiate. And when he finally came to the table, it was to try to squeeze out additional concessions. Which concessions does he consistently demand? That we release bloody, offensive, monstrous terrorists from prison. Terrorists who murdered our children. Terrorists who murdered our parents. Terrorists who murdered our husbands and wives from prison because they were murdered because they are Jews. That is what he demanded. He demanded that from us. And unfortunately, the Obama administration supported that demand. And then they blamed Israel for not being sincere in our desire to make peace because we said, finally, enough is enough. And we will not go through with a third tranche of prisoner releases of Israeli citizens of Arab ethnicity who murdered us because we are Jews. This we will not do. Because why? Because, and we would have done it, but we didn't do it because Mahmoud Abbas refused to negotiate with us. He refused to make one concession. And still today we see, we make concession after concession after concession, things that harm us, things that endanger the lives of Israeli citizens. Releasing terrorists from prison causes the murder of additional Jews. And we know this. We have statistical data to show it. The recidivism rate of terrorists who we release from prison at the behest of the U.S. government, in accordance with the demands of our supposed negotiating partners, the moderate Palestinian leadership. Jews have been killed. What is a Jewish life worth? Enough is enough. We never get credibility for showing our sincerity for peace. We get killed for showing our sincerity to peace. And I just want to add, I don't believe, and I don't believe it as a Jew, I do not believe that it is the responsibility of the Jewish people to be the only true Christians in the world and to constantly be giving our other cheek. I don't think that that is our responsibility. Our responsibility to our people and our responsibility to our future is to not give the other cheek. It's to say, excuse me, but you cheated me once. Shame on me. Shame on you. You cheat me twice. Shame on me. I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to my people. My responsibility to my people is to secure our lives first and foremost, and then we can move out and see whether we can talk. But the entire two-state formula is based upon this notion that Israel is culpable, that Israel is guilty, that it's our fault there's no peace, when we're looking at people who are preaching to their children that they should murder ours, that they should murder our children. This is what they are preaching to their children. This is what they are teaching their children everywhere. And yet we're the ones who are supposed to be making concessions. I say no. Prime Minister Netanyahu has also said no, because the guiding concept of his two-state formula is reciprocity. You want us to make concessions to you, you show good faith. You make concessions to us, stop the incitement to genocide. Stop the glorification of the murderers of our people. And when you do that, we can sit down and chat. So far, 22 years of this nonsense, and nobody has told the Palestinian people that Israel is just, that Jews are just, that they should make peace with us.
Ari, Caroline, if I could.
Thank you.
Ari, I believe you might have a response in mind.
I hope I have some time as well.
As well.
Sorry, I get a little worked up.
That's 10 more seconds for you, Ari. There.
Caroline, I totally share your feeling about the Jews and the fact that we are a people that contributed so much to humanity and was treated so badly by such large parts of humanity throughout the years. And I definitely see anti-Semitism, and I see unfair approaches to Israel, and I do my best to fight it. By the way, I'm in the front line, because sadly, your message, your line, is totally ineffective when it comes to the front line. When we lose, and here let me say something serious about our community. We have to be very cautious. We live in this Jewish bubble. The bubble is very strong because of this extraordinary success of the American Jewish community. But once you go out of the bubble and you talk to young people, America is changing. The demography is changing. People's minds are changing. As passionate as I am about my truth as a Jew, I have to go out and convince people. It's not enough to have all this great feeling of, oh, they hate us and we are just. We have to go out, and this is what the AGC is about, to go out and have political warfare. With this kind of sense of we are just right and everybody hates us, we will lose that battle. because we don't understand what's really going on. And again, what was Zionism all about? It was that it's time not to sit anymore in the ghetto and shout Gewalt. The Goyim hates us. Yes, many Goyim hate us. But it is our responsibility to go out and work in the real world. We cannot be different than any other country that, in the democratic world. We cannot do that. That's suicidal. It's suicidal. So it's so nice to get into these feelings of how just we are. We are just, but we have to be smart again as well. Just being just is not enough. Specifically, these terrorists that were talked about, why were they released? Netanyahu had two options: terrorist release or settlement freeze. And the Beit Yehudi would not let him go for the settlement freeze, which he wanted. So these terrorists you were talking about, they were released because you are not willing to freeze one settlement.
It's my fault.
And this is the main problem that we get because of our history, because of our fundamental justice, because we are in danger. We sometimes go into a kind of pattern that becomes dangerous. And this is when I talked about Ben-Gurion Zionism. That's what I meant. Listen, I'll say that. We are now 48 years to the 67 war. The 67 war was our greatest victory. Never before and never since were we so strong. That was from the 67 lines, when we had less space, less of the land, but we had more unity, more determination, and we were able to defend ourselves in such a victorious way. 6 years later, we had our worst failure. We had so much land, but we were weaker. Land is important, but land is not the only component in national security. And the problem with this approach is that when you try to grab it all, you lose it all. That was what Ben-Gurion was all about. You try to grab it all, you lose it all. We need land, and we have every right for the land. But we have to understand there are other people. We have to find a way to accommodate them, to respect them. If we don't respect them and find a way, a reasonable, realistic way, we are endangering ourselves in every way possible. And I'll say this again. The major fight now is how Israel is perceived among us and in the world. And we are a David. I have no doubt for a moment. We are a David. But we have to speak like a David, think like a David, and act like a David. Rather than be perceived as a Goliath, and it's unjustified, but this is the way we feed the worst feelings against us. So we have to go back to being this fit, strong, realistic, and just David that we were. When I go around campuses, I say to people, don't forget, fundamentally, historically, we are the underdog. We are an underdog on steroids. This is our great success. But we have, if we ignore the fact that there are millions and millions of others, if we will jeopardize their rights, if we will not accept the fact that they need their own rights and liberty, we will endanger our own liberty, survival, and existence. Thank you.
So, Caroline, we're close to running out of time, but I do want to allow you to respond. If I could ask you to confine it to 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go to close.
Look, I think that it's very important, and I'll make this very brief. I think there's just one aspect of what you're saying that I really want to discuss, and that is the issue of how we are among the nations of the world, how they perceive us, that we can't stand alone among the nations of the world. And I think that this goes to the heart of anti-Semitism and what anti-Semitism is really about. Because, you know, it was Professor Ruth Weiss who posited, and I think correctly, the notion that the ability of a democracy to withstand the tests of time, to retain its democratic character, is in many ways measured by the tolerance and the understanding and the acceptance that that democratic society has for Jews. That really the litmus test of whether or not a country's democratic rule of law is going to be able to survive is a function of how that society contends with their Jews, how that society looks at Jews, because we really are the most vulnerable people and have been for thousands of years. And so the issue of whether or not a democracy is vibrant is really directly correlated with the level of anti-Semitism in that society, or inversely directed. But we cannot, and a second point on anti-Semitism. I remember I had the privilege of interviewing Elie Wiesel back in shortly after I joined the Jerusalem Post in 2002, and it was right around the time of Defensive Shield. In fact, my first column was the first week of that operation, and I interviewed him in Jerusalem, and there was, anti-Semitic riots, the likes of which we hadn't seen throughout Europe and indeed in the United States, and they were very frightening. And I said to Elie Wiesel, I asked him, I said, so what do you say? What do you say to the Jews of America and the diaspora that are, for the first time in their lives, having to deal with the fact that they're hated because they're Jewish, that they never experienced this as children? I know I was blessed to grow up in a time when anti-Semitism was still unacceptable outside of the back rooms in this country. And I said, what do you tell them? They're scared, they're confused, they don't know what to think. And Elie Wiesel responded to me, he said, they have to ensure the most important thing in fighting anti-Semitism is not to allow the anti-Semites to define us. We, the Jewish people, have always defined ourselves from the time we received the Ten Commandments. He said, we have always defined ourselves as the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And we have to maintain our ability to define ourselves, because the moment that we give that right to define who we are and what we believe to our haters, they harm us, they weaken us, they make us less able to maintain and to continue on as Jews. And so the most important thing, he said, when we're dealing with this kind of internalized hatred of Israel and of Jews, is for us to keep clear about who we are, what we stand for, and what we believe, and not to think that we have to change the way that we do things in order to make the haters happy, because we can't. We cannot reason people out of something that they weren't reasoned into. Anti-Semitism is fundamentally irrational because it ascribes to us positions and statements, and in Israel's case, actions that we never undertook. We are not persecuting the Palestinians. We are not denying them their rights. Since 1996, 98% of the Palestinians have lived under Palestinian control, not under Israeli control. And when we say to ourselves that we are guilty of the projected guilt that they place on us, when in fact that guilt is in the hands of the Palestinian Authority, the bloody, authoritarian, rule of law destroying Palestinian Authority, we are in fact allowing anti-Semites to describe us and to tell us who we are, and I truly believe that that's dangerous and it's wrong. It's
Caroline.
wrong to us, and it's wrong to trying to put together a policy for contending with it.
Thank you. Ari, you have 3 minutes for your sum up and concluding remarks.
Well, I think that for ourselves, for our own soul, for our own security, and for our own future, we must find a wise way to change the present condition. Again, we should never be naive. We have to address the failures of what was tried before. But we need a kind of third way approach that will lead us to somewhere that is somewhat better. I'm deeply worried by the fact that the dynamics within Israel, and sometimes even within the community here, are taking us further and further away from the West. And we are here in this conference with this amazing organization. The great success of Zionism throughout the years was based on this combination of we are just, but we must be realistic and we must know in what world we live. We already destroyed ourselves in our history because of zealots. We have that gene in us. We have to be so cautious about that. Messianism and a zealot kind of approach are so dangerous. What was Zionism so much? I'm so passionate when I think about the founding fathers and mothers of Zionism, I shiver. They did not only have a brilliant diagnosis, they saw what's coming and they tried to prevent it. But they struck a balance. They were no flower children. They knew we live in a cruel world. But they understood we have to find a sophisticated approach. And they had two leading principles. One was always to have a superpower on our side. First it was the British, then the French, and then this great, great alliance with the United States of America, for which I'm so full of gratitude. And when I heard the way some people talked about Secretary Lew the other day, one of Israel's greatest friends, this kind of dangerous approach among our community, not having enough gratitude, not having enough respect. We cannot survive a day without America, with all due respect to our heroism. And America is a democracy, and the alliance is based on shared values. If we risk that, if we approach this disrespectful approach that we saw the other day, and first of all, I so feel embarrassed as an Israeli and as a Jew that this has happened to us. We should have our differences. When we have differences, we should express it. We should fight for our interests. I write a lot about mistakes being done in this city. But with respect, with gratitude. If we endorse a kind of arrogant approach, as if there are no other people, no Palestinians, no progressive Americans, no Afro-Americans, no Latino Americans, no young Americans, we are endangering ourselves. There is nothing more dangerous. Believe me, we will deal with all the threats of the Middle East. We are strong, we are sophisticated, we are innovative. We will deal with that. But if we lose, if we erode this alliance with the West, now that has to do with the other principle. The other principle was that always capture the moral high ground. Ben-Gurion was as tough as nail when it came to war. But he always understood that we must have the credit. We must reach out to peace even when peace is not there. If we will go the other way, and we will find ourselves on the wrong side of history, we are endangering this amazing achievement of putting ourselves in history again. So let's remember who we are. Let's remember how dangerous it is out there. Let's remember our values, our legacy, the Tikkun Olam dimension, the universal tribe dimension. We are not just about narrow-minded nationalism. We have a mission in this world. And in a proud way, in a Jewish way, let's both guarantee our soul, our values, our democratic identity, and our security, and our existence. They all go hand in hand. If Israel will not be Jewish, it will not be democratic, and if it will be seen to be not enough democratic, it will not be Jewish.
Thank you.
So let us... One thing. Before it's too late, let us save ourselves, build ourselves, and guarantee ourselves the glorious future we should and can have.
Thank you. Caroline, final word.
Thank you. Now, I think we've been told, I think you've said it in your way, and we're told oftentimes that the only way that Israel can have a successful foreign policy, the only way that we can get along in this world is by continuing to maintain our commitment to the two-state solution. The real question, though, is how can we have a successful foreign policy? How can we win the hearts and minds of the people of this country, the people of Europe, and of course beyond in Asia and elsewhere, if we're maintaining our loyalty to a foreign policy that is based on a lie? That is based on a lie that the PLO, that Hamas, that the Arab world is a partner in peace, and that there is a peace process today. That is a lie. The Palestinians are not partners. The PLO is not a partner in peace. Mahmoud Abbas is not a moderate. And you know this. You've written it.
We're in agreement.
Yeah, we're in agreement, complete agreement. This man has never accepted any compromise with Israel, has never agreed to any compromise, and will never agree to any compromise. He is not a partner in peace. And yet, the entire two-state solution formula for policymaking is based upon the lie that he is. The whole notion that we have a peace process is based upon the lie that we have a partner. We have no partner. And as a result, our foreign policy is based on the lie. Now, what is the basic assumption of this lie? It is the assumption of Israeli guilt. It is the assumption of Israeli culpability for the absence of peace. That is the basis of the two-state solution, land for peace. You get peace if you give up land. You won't get peace so long as you hold on to it. It's your fault. You're greedy Jews. You won't give up Jerusalem. And until you do, you won't get peace. And until you do, we're going to continue to blame you. We're going to continue to say that you didn't freeze Jewish property rights, that you didn't abrogate Jewish property rights, that you didn't abrogate Jewish civil rights, then that you didn't let Palestinian murderers out of prison. It's all your fault. Because the reason there is no peace is because you have too much land. And this is a lie. And the longer that we maintain our support and loyalty for this basically anti-Semitic paradigm, we cannot go forward in the world and explain ourselves to anybody because we're accepting as the basic assumption of our foreign policy an anti-Semitic idea of Jewish culpability. We're responsible for everything. We're guilty for everything. And you know what? We confuse then as a result people's ignorance with values, right? Secretary of State John Kerry made several comments over the past year when his attempt to draw water from Iraq and make peace with somebody who has no interest in peace with Israel. He said Israelis are too wealthy, we're too successful, we don't have a sense of urgency about the peace process. We had Martin Indyk telling us just last week on Israeli television that you, the Israeli people, are irrational because we don't move forward with peace. And really what we see here, and even comments by Ari today about our need to show our justness and our morality and our willingness to compromise in order to win hearts and minds. You know, this is one of the terrible things that the left has done, that they try to repackage to their audiences the audience's ignorance of facts with some sort of moral failure on the part of the Israeli people, that we don't want peace enough. You know, when we say that the Palestinians aren't peace partners, when we say that Mahmoud Abbas is not a moderate and that he's not interested in making peace with Israel and that Saeb Erekat is a serial liar, we're not saying it because we don't want peace. We're saying it because we're making a factual observation. We are observing facts, and we live in reality in Israel. We live in reality and we die by reality, and we have to deal with it, and it's an insult. It's an insult to us, to the Israeli people, to present this observation of fact, this observation of reality, as a moral failure, as if we don't want peace.
Caroline,
True morality, let me just finish this. True morality is to live by the highest values, to live by the highest values in the world that exists. And Israelis demonstrate our loyalty to the highest moral values every single day in the world in which we live.
Thank you. Thank you both for your passion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your courtesy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our great debate. Please make your way immediately to your advocacy training lunch.